It's called American Conspiracies. Now, you guys know that I'm a little bit of a skeptic when people say that they have a conspiracy theory about this or that. Everything that Jesse Ventura writes in this book is documented. And in the back of the book are the footnotes to every single claim or citation that he makes. So this is not just a book of some theory that comes out of the top of his head, but it's really an extremely well-researched book, and for me, I found it to be very convincing. Jesse Ventura, welcome back to News Talk Online on the Pal Talk News Network.
Hi, Gary. Good to be back, and thank you for all that. You saved me from having to say that. Usually I have to explain that, look, you know, this isn't my imagination running around like Tom Clancy and Vince Flynn, you know, when they write a fiction book. You know, as you said, everything in this book is documented, and I want to take a moment and give credit where that's due. It's my co-writer, Dick Russell, because that's Dick's strong point. He is one of these researchers that can find stuff that you can't believe you get it when he gets it. And so I give kudos to Dick Russell, my co-writer on the book, because he assembled all the stuff. I just had to go through it all and put it into some sort of book form.
Well, not only did he do that, but he went out and he found witnesses to certain recent events who kind of got short shrift, for example, by the 9/11 Commission. But before we get to 9/11, which is really the hot-button topic, when people think about conspiracies, Governor Ventura, at least in contemporary times, they think about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, they think about 9/11, but you point out that the very first American conspiracy really was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
That's correct, and it shocked me, because when we did the research for this book, why is it that our schools don't tell us that 8 other people were tried and convicted, 4 of them were put to death, and 1 of them was the first woman ever executed?
Exactly, and in fact,
he went beyond Abraham Lincoln. It was a Confederate conspiracy where they were trying to kill Lincoln, Vice President Johnson, Secretary of State Seward, as well as Ulysses S. Grant. They were only successful on 1 of them.
Actually, it was an attempt really to take over the government, wasn't it?
Well, it was a last-ditch effort to hit the Union as hard as they possibly could.
And you know, Jesse Ventura, I knew about this because this happens to be an area that I'm interested in, so I'm slightly versed in it. So I, of course, am aware of the history. That you are absolutely correct. When I was in public school, it was John Wilkes Booth acting alone. And it wasn't until I became an adult and independently researched this that I came up with exactly what you report so accurately in the book, that it was a conspiracy. But the conspiracy...
Well, what's interesting also, let me add, I was sitting with my 15-year-old nephew about a month ago, and I asked him what he knew about the assassination of President Lincoln, because he's in school right now. And he looked at me and said, "Wow, that's funny you'd ask me that." He said, "We just had that 2 weeks ago." And the only thing he was taught was about John Wilkes Booth. He got the same thing today as what I got in public school 40 years ago.
And that I got in public school approximately the same time. Let me ask you this, because of all the various conspiracies, and you guys are going to have to buy this book. There's no way in a half an hour we're going to be able to give it its due, because there's just so much information in here. The one that knocked me on my heels was the attempt to force a turnover of the government when FDR was president.
Oh, unbelievable. Isn't that a story? Thank God we had Marines General Smedley Butler. I think a 2- or 3-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, because they thought that Smedley would betray the president and go with them, but Smedley did the opposite. He turned them in, and amazingly, none of these people were ever tried or prosecuted for it.
You ask a lot of questions about other issues that you raise in the book, including Martin Luther King's death. You talk about Robert F. Kennedy's death. You talk about Malcolm X's death, which unfortunately is something that is not taught very much in the public school system and absolutely should have been. And, of course, you spend a lot of time on John F. Kennedy, and there seems to be a recurring theme to all of this, and that has to do with two things. Not only the acts themselves, but the disinformation campaign that followed these events, and this is where you and I are absolutely on exactly the same path, the failure of the news media to do its job.
Absolutely. You know, our news media today is pathetic because, you know, all they do is go along with the government story. There's sound bites. They get sound bites, and that's all people live off of is sound bite news. And you're not going to learn a thing by watching the news today.
Are you convinced that John F. Kennedy was not killed by one lone assassin in the Dallas book tower?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you why. I'll give you an interesting scenario that maybe you don't know. I just learned it myself within the last month. Okay, you got the 3 bullets, right? You got the first bullet that missed, the second bullet's the magic bullet, and the third bullet's the headshot, right?
Exactly.
Everybody focuses on the magic bullet and the headshot when the key to the whole thing is the bullet that missed. And let me tell you why. The bullet that missed, they had to account for it because it struck the curb and ricocheted up and injured a man named Mr. Teague. So they had to say that that bullet was fired because they had photographs of this guy bleeding. Well, if you go to the cement in Dallas where that bullet struck there, if you take a perfect line back to Kennedy's car, it will go directly to the second floor of the Daltex building. If you take that same line of the missed bullet and take it up to Lee Harvey Oswald's shooting nest in the book depository, it's 22 feet high and 33 feet wide.
And there's some question about whether he could have fired off all those...
Because with the shooting job that was done, the first bullet had to be a near miss. And yet, the reality of it, it missed by 22 feet.
And he fired too rapidly to be able to do that with the weapon that he supposedly was shouldering at the time.
Well, the first bullet he couldn't shoot rapidly. That's the good one, and that's the one he missed with, supposedly. But, I mean, that tells you right there. So it's the bullet that missed is the key to this thing, because there's no way that this shooter would have missed by over 22 feet.
Governor Jesse Ventura, as we...
It goes right to the second floor of the Daltex building, which is where many conspiracy people, we feel there was a shooter in the books depository, there was a shooter in the Daltex building, and then, of course, there was the shooter behind the picket fence of the grassy knoll.
You know, all these cases that we're talking about now, time has healed some of the wounds. They are fairly easy for us to objectively speak of, even if we were alive during some of these events. The one that is difficult emotionally, I guess, to even look at, and I'd like you to address that aspect of it as we delve into it, is what happened on September the 11th, 2001. It's very hard for a lot of Americans to wrap their head around the possibility that our government may have lied to us about the events on that day.
Well, I don't think it's that out of the realm anymore, because one of the latest polls that I saw, I believe, said close to 65 to 70% of the public feels the government was not truthful about 9/11.
Well, you know, there was some research, I don't know if you're aware of it, probably you are, in the American Behavioral Scientist, that's a scientific journal. It's called State Crimes Against Democracy. A professor from Florida State University by the name of Lance DeHaven Smith was the principal author, and he writes that state crimes against democracy involve high-level government officials, often in combination with private interests, that engage in covert activities for political advantages and power. Proven scads since World War II include McCarthyism, for allegations of communist infiltration, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the burglary in the office of Daniel Ellsberg, psychiatrist, which I think you talked about, the Watergate break-in, which you talked about, and the 2000 election, which you talk about in your book. It's almost as if his research mirrors what you are reporting in American Conspiracies.
Well, I can happily say I haven't read the professor's papers at all. So he virtually had no influence. I don't even know who he is, and this is the first I've learned about that.
Well, I'm sure you'll want to read his research. It's in the American Behavioral Sciences.
Let's take it back even before that. I just learned lately reading a great book by Colonel Fletcher Prouty. And do you know who he is?